Welcome to the SAG-AFTRA Foundation Conversations at Home program. I'm Jenelle Riley with Variety. Before we're joined by our guest today, I want to let you know that the SAG-AFTRA Foundation is a nonprofit organization that relies entirely on donations to provide emergency assistance and free educational programs to SAG-AFTRA artists. This conversation today is made possible thanks to the generosity of our supporters. Over the past year, the foundation has given over $6.5 million in COVID relief to more than 7,000 performers. So if you are a SAG-AFTRA artist and you need help, please ask. And if you can help, please give. Information can be found in the description of this video. Thank you for your support. And now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's guest. You know him for his work on series like Dawson's Creek, The Affair, Fringe, Little Fires Everywhere, but I promise that is all just a warm-up to his terrifying performance in Dr. Death. Please welcome Joshua Jackson. Thank you so much
Thank you for having me.
We're going to talk a lot about how terrifying you are, and I mean it entirely as a compliment.
If he's not terrifying, I've done something horribly wrong.
But before we get started, I always like to start out by asking, how did you get your SAG card? This is an audience of your fellow SAG actors, and I'd love to know how you got your card. I
started very young, and I got my SAG card on the Mighty Ducks.
You did?
Yeah, I made my days on the first Mighty Ducks movie because before I worked on the Mighty Ducks, I'm Canadian. I'd been working exclusively in Canada. And that was my first American production, and it gave me the days that I needed to get my union card. So I am a proud SAG member since 1991.
Is it, everything old is new again? Is it a little surreal to see the Mighty Ducks back?
It's surreal, but it's lovely. The way that the industry has gone over the years, Disney sort of got out of the live action children's movie. And so there had always been talk over the years of rebooting that franchise and bringing a new generation, because of all the things that I've done, it just has this seemingly evergreen audience. Like a new generation finds it, which has been amazing over the years. And I think it's just fantastic that they finally committed to bringing it out again and finding a new generation of kids and refreshing it for a modern youth audience. I think it's great. Yeah.
I would love to see you cameo, but as your Dr. Death character. Although, actually, no, that.
No, I wouldn't put that man within 1,000 feet of these kids. That's terrible.
I mean, it does feel strange to congratulate you on Dr. Death because it is so deeply disturbing, but you're so excellent in it. Were you familiar with the story of Christopher Dunst prior to this series?
No, so early pandemic. So last July, I got a call from, after the agent portion of the call, I got put in contact with Patrick McManus, and they had almost actually, I think, were one day before rolling when things got shut down in New York. And they had a cast change over the course of the pandemic because the previous actor was no longer comfortable, frankly, moving his family from where he lived during the pandemic. So suddenly this amazing job opened up. And I get into the conversation with Patrick, and it was complete tabula rasa for me. So he kind of pitched me the story, told me about the podcast, and gave me what turned out to be ultimately a small fraction, but seemed like an unbelievable amount of research material. And I went that evening to start listening to the podcast, binged the entire podcast, spoke to him again the next day, and was just all the way in, because it's a phenomenal character. It's a terrifying story. It is, he had provided me with 4 of the scripts, so I had a sense of what the storytelling was going to be. And I think it's always interesting to try to humanize a villain, to try to understand the how and the why of somebody who does something objectively terrible. I was just fascinated by this guy and went through, I think, with what most people who've listened to the podcast and people who will watch the show will immediately get the sense of, like, how could this possibly have happened? And there's not really a good and easy answer, which is why the character is so compelling, right? He's not just, if he was like a mustache twirling bad guy, it would make things so much more comfortable. But it turns out he's not. And because at some points I'm hoping you kind of want to root for him or want to try to understand or want to try to make it okay, it makes what he does even that much more dastardly.
Mm. Well, it's interesting, like having listened to the podcast, having watched this series, I still don't know if he was incompetent or evil or some combination of both.
Well, I mean, I guess you have to get into like then a conversation about what is the nature of evil, right? Does it have to be a conscious act, or can you be evil through an unconscious act or through your own bias? So my personal take on him is that he was definitely incompetent. I think that he truly believed he was brilliant. I think he still truly believes that he is brilliant. And if he had been a lawnmower, all you would have ended up with with dead grass, right? Slightly less intense. But because he had the paperwork, because he was protected by a system that is biased towards doctors, because he was actually a genius level intellect, just in a different realm. So because of all of the cultural and institutional failings around him, and then because of his own personal toxic makeup, the combination of those things created truly horrific outcomes for everybody. I mean, everybody that he touched. It runs the gamut from like minorly bad to death, but the outcomes were all terrible. And he's a fascinating character study. I mean, it's really kind of a dream role as an actor because he is the villain character, but he's not a mustache twirler. And Patrick made the decision to center him in the story. So we spend a lot of time examining the who and the how and the why of this guy and going on this journey with him. And yeah, you're meant to leave it still conflicted at the end. And I think partially that's the bias that we all have to want to believe our doctors. None of us want to believe that our doctors are out to maim or mangle us or that they're incompetent. And we live in a culture and the medical system that actively reinforces that, like, don't ask too many questions. Your doctor knows best. They give you a course of treatment, follow the treatment. And in this case, every single possible thing that could go wrong went wrong. And the outcomes are shocking. And
also like the damage that ego can do. Because it gets in his way every time. Every single time. And again, so as an actor, we deal in ego all the time, right? And so ego is an incredibly useful, helpful, necessary part of this job, right? You have to sometimes delusionally believe that you can do something until you can actually do it, right? And I think for surgeons and for high level, really for all doctors, but particularly for like very high intensity doctors, surgeons in particular, they have to believe they have the wherewithal to do these incredibly intense, difficult things. And some of that is delusion, right? You don't have time for moments of doubt inside of that operating theater because you have to be able to continue to progress along. And the mental clarity that it takes to have something go wrong, not get thrown off, fix it, save a human, and move on to the next task is quite intense. So there's a healthy level of ego. And then there's this other side of that, right? Which is you have to marry a sense of your own ego with an understanding of it, or its antithesis, right? Humility, which is you have to marry your ego with an understanding of who you are as a person. And that's what Christopher Dunst did not have. He did not have the ability to actually see himself in reality. He had a totally fantastical sense of self. I was actually trying to think, have you ever played a real person before? And do the process differ?
Yeah, I played a real person in the Laramie Project. That process was really incredibly specific because of the documentary resources of the Laramie Project. So you're working off of fixed text, and you can hear the voice of the person that you're playing, and you're playing only real scenarios. So that was a hyper specific example. And then in Bobby, I played in Bobby, I kind of played a composite, but he was a real person, the named person. And then I'm trying to think, I'm probably forgetting something. 30 years is a long time.
Well, in some ways, it's nice to have all this material to draw on versus playing a character from scratch.
Well, for Dunst, there's so much material around him, but there's very little material of him. So, we played around. He has a bit of a lisp, which we played around with a little bit, but didn't really use too much in his speech patterns, frankly, because it actually kind of made him too sympathetic in an odd way. But there's a lot of documentary evidence, obviously, around the trial, and I was able to hear him in his own voice in the deposition tapes. But there's massive blank spaces. There's not nobody. This is the first attempt at a deep dive on his life, and there's no documentary of Christopher Dunst, the man. There's again the podcast, which is amazing, but it really tells you the story of the case, right? It builds the case against him and what he did. But we still were able to work with some latitude, because there's always, there can be constraints around playing a real person, particularly if it's a person who everybody has, I don't want to say famous, but everybody has assumptions about. Like if you're playing Lincoln, that's an impossible job, right? Nobody knows anything actually about Lincoln the man, but everybody has all of their own assumptions about Lincoln. So with Dunst, you have a little bit more latitude because nobody has a fixed opinion about him yet. So we're able to sort of play around with the characterization.
Did you worry at all about the physical resemblance? Because there's small, subtle things they've done to make you look a little more like him.
Yeah, we worked. The physical resemblance was important. And then there's some things that were just necessities of telling a story. Like, when we go back to Dunst in college, that's about as skinny as it's possible for me to get at 43. But I tried to lean myself down as much as possible to show that the youthfulness of that body juxtaposed, knowing where we were going towards the end. But the reality is that when he was in college, Christopher Dunst was 220 pounds and a massive guy. But for us and for me, it was important to me to show this progression over time as he starts to basically internalize all of the pressure on him and wear it on his body. So we took latitude in some of those ways, right? And we didn't do, until we got into the prosthetic work, we didn't do a nose or a chin, because those are slightly different. But again, because nobody has a mental image of the man, I didn't feel like it was necessary to be doing an impersonation, right? I felt like there was a wide latitude to be faithful to what was true, what we know to be true about him, and then try to fill in the gaps and fill in the gaps and create this character, and the hardest part was try not to judge him. Try to find a way to get inside and believe in the way that he believed.
I mean, I am a huge fan of horror films, and yet this is just terrifying on another level.
Yeah.
And was it ever challenging for you to be in this headspace? I mean, I don't know if you worry about taking the character home with you, or just the feel.
It didn't. So because he was, I'm not a licensed to say this, but my opinion is that he was a sociopath. Mm-hmm. He was of such full belief of himself that through most of the awfulness, because he so believed and had no consciousness of his own guilt, I didn't think that I was wearing the weight of playing this man. But particularly as we started doing the end of the Jerry storyline, and the trial, and just hearing the stories of what these outcomes meant to people's lives, it was very difficult to sit inside of those filming days and try not to be impacted by the effect that this man had in people's lives. And I thought I had done psychologically pretty well with it until we finished. And then once we finished and the weight finally came off, I realized just how intense the pressure had been over the course of those 5 months. But it does help. It helps having a little baby. It helps having a wife. It helps having life that knows nothing of what I'm doing on my day to day, and coming home and being able to dive into that and just shed that skin, because it's psychologically pardon me, it's an awful place to live for those months. And there were definitely days where I would go home with my head literally pounding, just like filled with the tension of this man.
What has been your most challenging role? I mean, I would think it was this, but I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I mean, the most challenging thing that I've ever done is still Children of a Lesser God, because I had to learn sign language and then be able to perform at speed in front of a live audience in two languages while interpreting for all the deaf characters. So the mental demand and the physical demand of that is unlike anything I've ever done. This is probably, this is because the end of this story, there's no light, right? There's nothing good that comes out of Christopher Dunst's existence. This was by far the darkest place that I've had to stay for the longest amount of time.
I'm glad you mentioned Children of a Lesser God, because I was lucky enough to see that production. It was so stunning.
Excellent.
It was just 3 years ago, right? It was recent.
3 years ago. Yeah, actually, I think 3 years ago, we closed 3 years ago, almost today. Maybe not quite today. Yeah. But just about 3 years. Oh, no, you know what today is the 3-year anniversary of? And I know this from Instagram. Today is the 3-year anniversary of Lauren Ridloff being nominated, or being at the Tonys for her nomination for Best Actress.
Gosh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
She was stunning.
Phenomenal. Yeah.
Was that the last time you were on stage, and are you looking to get back on into the theater?
Yeah, so the director of that, Kenny Leon, and I have collaborated now twice, and I am very hopeful. Actually, he's in town, so I'm going to talk to him this weekend and put that to him. What are we doing next? I will get back to stage, but the baby came and then the pandemic hit. So last year was not a live theater kind of year, but I'm hoping maybe later in this year, actually, depending on how things go here with opening up in New York.
Would you ever do a musical?
I can't sing.
That doesn't stop a lot.
I know. Yeah, I can't sing, and I don't really know about my dancing so much, but so I think musicals are probably off the list for me.
I would love to see that. There's nothing I love more than a musical on Broadway.
It's also it's such a specific skill set, like I'm a latecomer to, well, I guess I did theater a little bit when I was younger, and I came back to it later in my career, and the skill set ports pretty well, but there is such a specific performance style to musical theater that I'm not sure that first time Broadway would be a great choice for me. Maybe there need to be like a small warm up.
Start in La Jolla.
Yeah, exactly.
Do the tour. I want to talk about the amazing cast in Dr. Death. And it's funny because one of my favorite movies of all time is Malice, where Alec Baldwin plays like...
I am God.
Yes, exactly. And I feel like that's sort of Christopher Dunst's internal monologue. So I love seeing you guys go head to head. And Christian Slater as well.
Yeah, well, and the two of them together are just brilliant. I mean, they're just brilliant. Who knew that this was like the comic duo that we've been waiting for all these years? But again, I credit them, and I also credit Patrick, and all of the writers. It's because the central character, if you're going to make Dunst the central character, you're going to have darkness at the heart of this show. And then to juxtapose it against the true heroes of the show, who have this sort of odd couple, bickery, bantery relationship, which allows you to one, as an audience member, I think, take a very necessary breath, because that main storyline can be so intense sometimes, but also allows them to get over some pretty heavy ideas in a seemingly lighthearted way, and they're just brilliant together. I mean, it's so much fun to watch them. Actually, the whole cast from top to bottom, but the dynamic that those two guys have is pretty fantastic.
I was thinking, like, maybe more so than any other actor I can think of, you frequently find yourself in these amazing ensembles. Do you think that's something you're drawn to, or is it coincidental?
No, this is, I'm very much in the place of my career where good people and good material is sort of the driving idea. And yeah, I mean, I've had the great opportunity, particularly in these last 4 or 5 years, to choose to be a part of and be chosen to be a part of great ensembles. And it's the joy of being an actor, working with good people, and directors are part of that. Working with Jen Morrison now as a director, and seeing, I was astonished by her. I've always known her to be such a powerhouse of a woman and a powerhouse of an actress, but to see how she has translated that, and the maniacal dedication that she has to becoming a director, to learning that entire language, is marvelous. And that's where I want to be in my career. I'm not so sure I was ever totally interested, but I'm much less interested in the external trappings than the like day-to-day joy of it. I've worked on some difficult shows, and if I have the choice, I'll never go back to doing that again.
How do you sort of handle it when a set is challenging? I mean, maybe that's where the acting comes in.
I mean, it's hard. I'm a big believer that the tone and the environment on a set translates to the screen. Not everybody believes that, but I'm a firm believer in that. And last, or summer before last, I got a chance to work on Little Fires Everywhere, and I cannot sing the praises of those two women enough, as women, as business women, as actors. And they both, in different ways, but ultimately ending at the same place, they both create an environment that allows everybody to do their best work. And it is unfortunate and frustrating that oftentimes when ego meets money and pressure, that I have found that people, they kind of show you who they are when the chips are down, and instead of building up, a lot of people's instinct is to try to tear down. And it is just so counterproductive to what we're all trying to do, because the stuff is hard enough as it is. It doesn't need to be made any more difficult. And yeah, difficult sets are difficult, and I can't actually say that I have done very well in them, right? I either get in my own ego and become combative, or check out, or you see that tension carry forward onto the screen, and I just don't think it's helpful. So as much as possible, I'm going to try to avoid that going forward. You
said earlier, I was a little startled. You said you were 43, and that shook me, because I think of you.
How do you think I feel?
But you did start at such a young age, and you've, obviously, and you've always seemed to have a really good sense of self and a good perspective. Would you say that was instilled in you in an early age, or is that something you had to learn? Because this can be a really tough business.
I think, it's definitely something I had to learn. And I think I also had the benefit of good mentors in very critical moments in my career. So we were talking a little bit about the Mighty Ducks earlier. So Emilio was an unbelievably gracious mentor at that critical, because I knew nothing. I mean, literally nothing. We were sitting around doing a scene one day, and I was so green that I would learn everybody's dialogue. And as he was speaking and I was off camera, I was mouthing his dialogue. I guess I had just memorized the page, and I was like, okay, he says it, and I said that, and then I said that, and I say this. And he literally had to, take me aside. He's like, okay, so don't do that. and he just, he gave me so many tools, from things that happen off camera, things that happen on camera, and then eventually how do you deal with the noise that starts to invade your life from outside sources. There was Emilio, there was Patrick Stewart. Frankly, there was my mother at the very beginning of my career, who worked in the film industry and was able to give me a basis for, how to approach it as a profession rather than a hobby. And then the process of working on Dawson's Creek and the sort of trial by fire of all that, and the absurdity of the sort of popular fame that came with that. And then just, it probably wasn't until I finished that job that I understood that this was my profession. This was something I was going to get to do with my life. And it took a long time for the young man to meet the confidence on camera. Sort of fake it till you make it kind of thing.
Is there a moment you can pinpoint it, like a particular project, or was it more of a process than that?
It was more of a process, and it was a sort of one step forward, two steps back kind of thing. I think the first time I did a play in London, right after the end of Dawson's Creek, a Mammoth play called A Life in the Theater. And it was that experience that kind of reignited my love for doing this. But it was the first time I'd been on stage since I was a very little kid. And it was the first time that I had ownership of a performance. Mm. And it was the process of actually realizing that I was pretty good at what I do through that. Because, this business will beat you down. I mean, it will break your spirit. And frankly, we used to shoot 24 episodes a year. It's just an insane amount of work. So the process, my feeling about network television is that you're only ever at best keeping your head above water. But there's very little that you can be proud of that you're doing because it's happening so fast. You're basically just getting words out and hoping for the best, right? Just like trusting instinctual portions of yourself. But there's so little work that you're doing because it's just a freight train. It's just moving. And frankly, the economic logic of network is quantity, not quality. So that can be quite dispiriting. And it wasn't until I did A Life in the Theater that I got back to a place of like, oh wait, I really enjoy this. And I enjoy the process of character building and performing with another actor. And I think that sort of launched me off, but it was still, it's still a process. I still bump into things all the time. There was times in Dr. Death, where you just get into the weeds in some of these scenes and you realize that you're at the end of your toolbox, or you're at the end of a long week, or your brain just shuts down, and you have that you turn back into an 8-year-old child who's like disappointing your parents because here you are on set and everybody's waiting for you to go and you don't have it anymore and you don't know what to do and you just got to figure it out.
I was going to ask, what was the most challenging moment or scene for you on Dr. Death?
Well, like I said, weirdly, it's where I was asked to do very little, but keeping the facade of self-belief through the trial was difficult. And then there was some technically difficult things, like I had to learn how to suture, I had to learn all of the gobbledygook around surgery. And sometimes there was just a lot of just a volume of work because Dunst is so centrally located. So, there were definitely times, like there was 1 week where, because we had a couple COVID shutdown days and just we had to like jam 40 pages of dialogue into a week. And yeah, by the end of that week, your brain is just mush. There's nothing left. I remember I was working on a movie called Lay the Favorite, 8 years, or however long ago it was. And Rebecca Hall is the lead of that. And she was playing a very broad character. So there's a lot of things that she had to like keep up every day, an accent, mannerisms, even a way of walking. And she's brilliant, but we got into this like very high leverage scene towards the end of the film, and it was getting late. She'd been at it all day, just driving this massive scene all day, and you could see her start to like actually get tired. And we got into hour 12 or 13, and the whispery conversation started happening at the producer level of like, when are we going to wrap this day? And we only had this location for one day, and finally, the director comes out and he looks at Rebecca and he says, "It's all right, darling. You just don't have it tonight. That's fine. We're going to come back tomorrow. We're going to do it again." And I had been working for 25 years at that point. And I had never seen a company make that very smart choice, right? Here was your leading lady who was brilliant in every single way, but had literally reached the end of her human tether that day and just needed a good night's sleep to come back. And in service of the story, the director made a choice that I'm sure was uncomfortable for him and uncomfortable certainly for the producers to have to pay the money, but made the right choice for the character. And it's just so we're very penny wise and pound foolish in this business. And it hit me so hard that here I am telling the story years later, because I was gobsmacked by the beautiful simplicity of making a humane choice, which is so very rarely part of our business. And so, yeah, I guess that's a tangent, but it really, like, there were definitely times where I reached levels of emotional and intellectual exhaustion on this. And I have to say that Patrick was very conscientious about, he's a, I want to say uniquely humane executive producer. And he was very conscientious about allowing breathing room for that kind of stuff. Like, if you were at the end of your rope, you were at the end of your rope, and we would come back to it and get it sorted out.
That's refreshing, astonishingly refreshing.
Yeah.
I'm curious, did you think at all about what Christopher Dunst would think of this series? You probably couldn't even have that thought. And I was thinking about it because, part of me thinks his ego would really love it, particularly that you're playing him. I'd be really curious to know, if he would watch it.
I have a funny feeling that he would be like Tom Cruise or nothing. You know what I mean? He'd be like, what? That guy? Never. I think he would be flattered to know. I assume that his ego would be flattered to know that he was being discussed, and then disgusted that all of us peons still couldn't recognize his genius.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Like in sort of the Donald Trumpy way. Like, I think he enjoys all of the press, good, bad, or indifferent, because he just likes being talked about. It flatters that insecurity in him. But then he hates everybody who sees him for who he is. Yeah. I think Dunst is the same way.
Yeah. Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, I'm not surprised. You spent 5 months as him, so of course you did.
Yeah.
Well, again, it is such a fantastic performance. I hope you go off and do like a nice rom-com in Hawaii now.
Yeah, so I was talking about this with Reese Witherspoon when we were shooting Little Fires. I've been doing this for 30 years and I've never done a comedy.
You're kidding. Wait, really?
Yeah, think about it.
You would know better than me, but that doesn't seem right.
It certainly doesn't seem right. Yeah, never ever done a comedy. So yes, I think I have a rom-com. I mean, I've done like comedy adjacent. I've done some like humorous things, but I've never done a proper comedy.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're someone who would, thinks it's a good idea to work with your spouse, but I would love to see you and your wife.
Yeah,
one together.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Yeah, we've talked about it. We just got to find the right thing.
Let's package it right now. 20%.
Yeah, we should have. I mean, if we were more industrious, or really, if we weren't completely enamored of our child and spent all of our time with her, we probably should have done like some like couples thing here in the pandemic, but we didn't.
Well,
missed opportunity.
I'm a big fan of her Twitter account. She's a joy to follow. And again, congratulations on a fantastic role. On behalf of the SAG-AFTRA Foundation, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your experiences.
Thank you for having me. And thank you to everybody who is part of this beautiful union, who is holding the line for labor in this country.
Absolutely.